Wow, what a wonderful place for me to be and for you to be. What a wonderful thing to have experienced and to be part of. I have one particular person who is very happy that I'm standing here, and that's my maternal grandfather. My maternal grandfather was a Baptist preacher. He was a real Baptist. When my mother married my father, who was a Pentecostal at that time, as a good Baptist of that age, my father was very unhappy. My grandfather was very, very unhappy about this. But right now, I know he's in heavenly glory. He's looking down and he's saying, Miroslav, you've arrived. You're speaking to the Baptists and at the world stage. So now it's very good. All those Pentecostals and Episcopalians and all others you speak to, that's okay. They need to hear something good, but now is the real time. So we've heard amazing music. We worshiped God, and I want to turn our attention for the minute away from God and to the world in which we live. We live in a time of great tensions. I don't need to remind you of that. Economic tensions, cultural tensions, political tensions, wars, racial tensions, ecological tensions. And you might say that there is a kind of deep fissure or fissures that run within nations and between nations. They run between families and within families. And for many of us, those fissures run straight through the middle of our hearts. Now, there are times when tensions of this sort are kind of adjustments that we need to go through. There's a tension because there are hiccups. But there are times also when these tensions are expressions, especially tensions on the world stage, are expressions of epochal changes. Many rapid and out of control changes, such as devastation of our environment, developments in technology, Helen mentioned that as well, and it's on all of our minds. They seem to suggest that current tensions are expressions just of such epochal changes. Our world, our current epoch, seems to be dying, but another one has not yet sufficiently formed to be born. We are in a rupture. Rupture is in each one of us. The rupture is, in many ways, us. What do we do in a state of our own and world's rupture? A state full of danger, but a state also with some promise. What is our mission as community of churches of Jesus Christ? Yesterday, during the interview, I mentioned American poet Archibald MacLeish. He has written, "A world ends when its metaphor has ended." And then he explains in the poem, "An age becomes an age and all else beside, when sensuous poets in their pride invent emblems for the soul's consent that speak the meanings men will never know, but men-imagined images show." MacLeish was right. We need fresh metaphor for the world. He mentions only men-invented images. Metaphors that are human inventions. But we also have sacred metaphors. Metaphors that come from the divine revelation. And in fact, if you open your Bibles, if you read them from the beginning to the end, you will find many, at least a few, such metaphors. At the beginning, we have metaphor of a garden. World is a garden. At the end, we have a metaphor of New Jerusalem. I'll come to speak about those. In the middle, we have a metaphor. What is this world? It used to say it's a valley of tears. Or we have metaphors in Jesus' ministry like the kingdom of God. Now, one of the metaphors that I have come to appreciate greatly is the metaphor, biblical metaphor of the home, specifically the home of God. And to give you the reason why I think that is a really important metaphor, I first need to answer for you. You need to first answer together with me one of the most important questions which we almost never ask. And this is the question, why did God create the world? Maybe there are good reasons why we don't bother too much with this question. For one, it is just enormous question. It seems impossible to answer. How would you and I know what was in God's mind when God decided to create the world? And didn't prophet Isaiah say that God's thoughts are above our thoughts as far as heaven is above this earth? And second, even if we could answer this question, the question might not be as important. To some people, it might sound like one of those philosophical questions. Some of you who study philosophy, you know one of the most important in an answer of a philosophical question is, why is there something rather than nothing? Now, that's interesting for philosophical geeks and theological geeks like I am, but for the rest of us, that seems like pretty much marginal kind of a question. Better devote energies to more consequential and urgent tasks. For instance, like improving the lot of 2.6 billion people who live on only $2 a day. Those 2.6 billion people, each one of them is a child of God. They are extraordinarily important. And I'll return to them in a moment and show how this big question matters to them too. But let me ask you a personal question. And that is, why do you exist? Now, I'm not asking how you came to be born. We all know mechanics that is involved. I'm asking about the purpose of your life. Now, Christians, it's true also of the Jews and Muslims, theists more generally, have always believed that we don't simply choose the purpose of our lives as it suits us. This is a very popular, by the way, opinion in the popular culture. But we don't choose the purpose of our lives as it suits us, as we may choose an outfit for a party. Our purpose is woven into the fabric of our being as God's creatures. And that takes us back to our question. Why did God create the world? Why did God create each one of us? To ask why God created the world is at the same time to ask how it is that we can live rightly and flourish in our planetary home and what our vocation is in the world today. So that's my topic. Why, then, did God create the world? Now, two books of the Bible, Genesis and the Gospel of John, they start with the words, in the beginning, and then go on to state that God created all things, but if you read immediately, neither of them says why God created what God created. God creates and declares the creation good, and that's all that we have. But if you look very carefully at those two texts, you will see actually that how the arc of creation goes, and they answer question in the process. First, let's start with Genesis. The arc of the story in Genesis begins at the beginning of Genesis, but does not end with the book of Genesis. It actually ends with the book of Exodus. God creates, and God declares creation good. Humans sin and sully its goodness. God calls Abraham. God delivers the children of Israel from slavery in Egypt. And all of this, why? All of this is to fulfill one promise. I will dwell among the Israelites, and I will be their God. When the glory of the Lord then fills the tabernacle at the end of Exodus, God has come to dwell with the people and lead them to the promised land. God's dwelling in Israel, in the people and in the land, is the capstone of creation. Why did God create the world? So as to come to dwell in it. Now, skip to John's Gospel. The very last words Jesus says before he's arrested, condemned, and crucified explain why the world came to be. God creates all things, comes to dwell in Israel, takes on human flesh in Jesus, reveals God's character, and bears human sin. Thank you for that wonderful song that we were singing about the blood of Christ. Takes human sin on himself so that he can fulfill overarching purpose. What is this overarching purpose? So that the love with which the Father had loved the Son before the foundation of the world may be in Jesus' disciples. In fact, so that the Father and the Son themselves might come to be in the disciples and to make home in them. Put simply, God created the world to dwell in it. Now, once you have these two big stories of the Bible and your eyes are open to God's purpose, it becomes obvious that the Garden of Eden at the beginning and the New Jerusalem at the end are actually about God's dwelling, about God's home. Why did God create the first humans and place them in the Garden of Eden? To help the garden flourish as their home. And why did God come? This is really funny section of the Genesis 2 account. Actually, it comes in Genesis 3. Why did God come to walk in the garden at the time of the cool of the day? You remember that there's a rustling of the leaves when God walks. How does it sound when God walks? If I asked you that question, how would you answer it? Without me telling you to look in Genesis 3. So God comes. Why does God come? Because the garden was God's home too, not just Adam's and Eve's. The Bible closes making the same point. At the very end of Revelation, John of Patmos sees the New Jerusalem coming down, and then to make sure that what he's seeing, he understands the very thing that is happening before his eyes, a loud voice from the throne explains, see, I should have some really deep voice, see the home of God. I don't know how, I know how it sounds when God walks, it rustles, but I don't know how it sounds when God speaks. So I'll do it in my voice. See, the home of God is among mortals. He will dwell with them. They will be his peoples. God and the peoples of the earth have a home together. The reason why God created the world is not obscure at all. God explained it more than once. God, the Creator, is a homemaker God. All you homemakers, rejoice. Now we can turn to these 2.6 billion impoverished people, many of whom are either homeless or live under conditions that are hardly worthy of the name home. Starting with poverty, I will briefly discuss then 4 major forces that are opposing God's purposes with creation. They are the obstacles of God's homemaking project. So first, I start with the economics of home. Specifically, I'll talk about the distribution of wealth, though I could actually talk about distribution of opportunities and also distribution of capacities, and the results would be roughly the same. How would you feel about a home in which a child and their mother live on $2 a day, one sibling lives at $20 a day, another more privileged sibling lives at $200 a day, and the father had $2,000 a day for his sole use? If you do the math, you will see that I left out the super rich from my example. They matter less than we often think, and often they serve to relieve the bad conscience of people like you and me who belong to the global middle class. Imagine the meal of this family that I've just sketched. At the one end of the dining room table, two family members in threadbare clothes with half-full bowls of plain rice and a pitcher of polluted water, while at the other end of the same table, the father and the other sibling, dressed in finest fashion, enjoy culinary masterpieces and drink exquisite wine. If that happened in your neighbor's home, I guess you would be scandalized. As the story Jesus told about rich men and Lazarus attests, God would be scandalized as well. God is scandalized if it's true that God can be scandalized. I'm not sure that that's a proper theological statement about God's anger at the state of the world. God is scandalized. And yet, you and I live in just such a home, our single planetary home. Now, you may, like me, you may be at a loss about what exactly to do about that issue. But I think you and I, should feel discomfort with the idea of how far God's purposes for the world how far the world is from God's purposes for the world. Now, this is economics. Politics always follows economics. Sometimes it's the other way around, but mostly it goes from economics to politics. The malnourished and shabby-clad group at one end of the table will cast longing looks toward the other side of the table. How could you blame them for wanting to partake of that sumptuous meal? As to the feasters, if they even dignify the other side of the table with their attention at all, it will be with a sense of their own superiority and to ensure that the poor are being kept at a distance. For the proximity of the tribe of Lazarus could endanger their superior standing and the benefits of their privilege. Now, eventually, I think some kind of a wall would go up and security apparatus would be put in place. What was single home would be divided. Lazarus, perhaps with bitterness and anger simmering in his soul, would end up in some makeshift abode. The rich man would build himself a fortress, a testimony not just to his wealth, but to his fear as well. Both would be homeless, though each in a very different way. One locked up in the gilded prison of his luxury and false superiority, and the other mired in a life of languishing and of precarity. Fundamentally, though, the two are brothers, siblings, Abraham's children, which is the point of Jesus' story of rich man and Lazarus. God created each. God meant for both to live in a single home that is God's world. Now, From the dawn of history to present day, wealth and power have been thwarting God's homemaking purposes. More specifically, I want to say, our inordinary love for wealth and misuse of power have done so. For we need both wealth and power to have a home. Indeed, if we didn't have any power, didn't have any wealth, we couldn't live at all. And yet, when wealth and power become distorted, they acquire these monstrous features of what the Bible calls, it's interesting, it has names for it, right? Mammon, false god, and Leviathan, also a false god. They undermine our flourishing and undo our sense of belonging. Okay, so Mammon and Leviathan, two monsters. I have two more monsters to speak to you about. And these second two monsters are a little bit less familiar, and they're much more modern. And they have a modern-sounding names. And what I'm going to do is they're called escalation and reification. I'm going to call one Cursus, which is a Greek god of running, and Medusa, which is a Greek goddess who turns everything into stone. So we're talking about speed, and we're going to talking about turning things into stones. Let's start first with escalation. Now, to survive in modern societies, you have to live the way you ride your bicycle. You've got to move forward. And the moment you stop, you know what happens. You fall. And the thing is, it's not enough to move at whatever pace suits you or you're able. You are in a race, whether you want it or not. And you have to keep moving faster and faster. That is called escalation. There's a whole sociological theory. If you want to read about it, Hartmut Rosa, German sociologist, has written quite a bit about it. Now, we can call this monster Cursus, the racer. It's at work in two key domains of our life, in time and in space. First, the pace of life is accelerating. We never have enough time. Describing this phenomenon, sociologist Hartmut Rosa, who I mentioned, says this. Notice very carefully. Amidst monetary and technological affluence, citizens of modern societies are close to temporal insolvency. For short, we're always running behind, which means we are always running. Whether we are on the poor or rich side of the table, we mostly rush through our meals, worrying about what we have left undone, catching up on the news, multitasking. Meals, like the rest of our lives, are just speedy steps of a hamster whose wheel is spinning faster and faster. And the hamster wheel has never been a good image for good life for human beings. Maybe for hamsters, but not for human beings. Second, the scope of our activity is expanding. Now, when I was a student, and I think later on some of my students here, when I taught in the same place, will maybe confirm what I'm going to say, we used to joke about the president of our college. He happens to be my father-in-law, my brother-in-law. So with apologies to Peter Kuzmich, which is his name, I will tell this story, which he knows, that was told about him. There's people, students said, what's the difference between God and Dr. Kuzmich? Well, difference is that God is everywhere, and Dr. Kuzmich is everywhere except here. Now, students today cannot tell that joke, right? Because pretty soon they would become the butt of that joke as well. With smartphones in their hand, they too are everywhere except here. Always somewhere else. Which means never really be here. Never really be at home. Home needs time. Home needs presence. The logic of escalation. This monster, cursus, makes both hard to come by. The story it keeps telling us, this is really important, the story it tells us is this: where I am and what I do, who I am and what I have are never good enough. The consequence, when curses is running our lives, there is no time when I feel at home, no place where I feel at home. So that's my third monster. The second one is Medusa. This is reification. Another term for reification is, those of you who study colonial studies will know it, is thingification, which is really clumsy word, but avoids association with George. Oh, I'm starting to teach you here. This is not a good idea. I'm supposed to be offering an address. Okay, back into my text. So thingification. Everything that surrounds us, all God's creatures, are turned into cold and lifeless things. This dynamic is all around us. It's there in the sciences, which tend to treat all entities as things. Each is part of the network of mathematically calculable causal relations. Modern technology does the same. To a person with a hammer, Americans say all things look like a nail. To a person with a tool, all things become manipulable objects. Modern medicine is a case in the point. It is very, very successful. But that's in part because it tends to treat human bodies as machines to be fixed. So is much of modern agriculture, for instance. It gives us high yields, but at the expense of treating soil, water, and diversity of plant life as mere things, not as creatures. Now, for the personal example of the Medusa's reifying work, turn with me back to Lazarus at one end of the table and the rich man at the other. Lazarus, or this mother with a child, they sit on a scratched up, wobbly plastic chair, maybe fished out of a dumpster. It is a mere replaceable thing for them. It serves its purpose, although rather badly. It's not an old friend with which they resonate, so that when they sit on this chair, they feel at one with it, at home with their chair. Do you have a chair like that at home? I do. Come home, back home, and when I come back home, there's this chair in the living room. This is my chair. Other people can sit there, of course, but it's mine. When I sit in it, I kind of feel, now I kind of relax, and I am now at home, because that chair is not just a replaceable thing. If somebody gave me exactly the same chair, brand new, I would say, no, thank you, I want that chair. And the reason I want that chair, because I sat there for a long time, and I want to continue to have this relationship, my chair and I, we're buddies. Now that means things are alive. And that's kind of relationship with which we have with one another and with things when we are actually at home. If you have a plastic wobbly chair, that's not going to happen. But the other end of the table too. Rich man sits in his armchair as a king on his throne. But for him too, the chair is not an old friend. It's a thing whose chief purpose is to underscore his superiority. If anyone at the table had a better chair, he'd discard the one that he has and he'd buy himself a better one so that he could be the king of that table. When people and things matter to us only as means, but not in their own right, we're not at home. So we have our answer to that very big question. Why did God create the world? God created the world so that it might be God's home and ours. indeed home to all God's creatures. And we have these 4 home-destroying monsters, Mammon, Leviathan, Cursus, Medusa. The conflict between God's homemaking and these monsters, and there are other monsters, by the way, which all of you can imagine and we can analyze further. This conflict between God's homemaking and this monster is the site of Christian human calling. Jesus was God in the world on the mission of planetary homemaking. He gave the disciples his Spirit so that they would continue his mission and do their part in helping make the world into God's home and ours. Why? Because we humans can be what we are created to be only together. And when each of us becomes a kind of a nodal point of genuinely home-like relations with each other and with the entire creation. Now, granted, we can never make the world into God's home. Actually, we can never fully make it into our own home. We are broken human beings living in a broken world. But we can live in a more home-like ways. We can take the time to build resonant relationships with people and places. We can work to heal fractures caused by those unhoming forces. We can struggle against homelessness in our cities and work for better politics, better economics. Above all, we can open ourselves to God's transforming presence. At the very end of Jesus' life, after he had washed the feet of his disciples, and before they together left for the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was to be betrayed and then later crucified, Jesus taught his disciples for one last time. Those are the famous farewell discourses at the end of the Gospel of John. At the key point in these speeches that Jesus gave, he said, "Those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them. And then we will come to them and make our home with them." Each disciple of Jesus was to be the home of the triune God. And the whole world is to become the home of the triune God. Personal transformation of the world, personal transformation of the world, they go together hand in hand. They're part of the one and the same mission of God. To work with God on the mission to make world into God's home, each of us needs to be the home of God. The movement of transformation, it starts from within, and from inside goes outside, from the person to the world. I have to mention at this point my mother. She's a devout woman of prayer who I have greatest admiration. And I remember once we were sitting outside on an island of Ugljan, and she was describing to me her experiences to God. And then she did what she would sometimes do in previous years. She made this gesture, like this, looking me straight in the eyes. And she said, "Miroslav, you know, the most important things in the world, they don't happen in Washington and Moscow. We would now add Beijing and maybe Oslo. They happen right here, in our hearts. It starts with each one of us. How can we make the world into God's home if we ourselves within have not become the true home of God, dwelling place of God? Then we can become, in the power of the Spirit, homemakers with God, continue Christ's mission to make this world the home of God. Why did God create the world? Let's go and live out into our purpose and into world's purpose in the power of the Spirit. Thank you.